for the camera, one is for the sound.
Yes, I can see you loud and clear.
It's always a surprise if my sound is working. Sometimes it's working perfectly, and other times I need my phone for the sound. So that's why. Okay, we start today with our guest, Florence Koendering, who will give a presentation about her work and experiences around the best interests of the child. Most welcome, Florence. We are very happy that you are here. She will give a lecture for around half an hour. And after that, there is time also to ask questions to Florence. So my question is, put them in the chat, your questions, or write them down and ask them after a presentation. After the round of questions, we break up in smaller rooms and we will discuss a concrete case about a situation of one or more children who, what's the best to do? What is in the best interest of the child? How do you bring that in practice? So we have in smaller groups a discussion about that. Are there any questions about the program? And after the breakout room, we come back in this plenary room and we will exchange about our discussions. Florence, she's the founder of Family Based Solution, and she's also the author of several books on alternative care. Since my camera is working, Celine, so it's really worth reading. Best Intentions Still Causing Harm, around orphanage volunteerism. I also have this book, Understanding the Trauma of Institutionalized Children. I really can recommend reading it. And there are more books also available online. She's also writing blogs on her, and she shares it on Twitter. So please follow her. She will give today an introduction about the background of the best interests of the child within the UN guidelines on alternative care. And she will take us through how this can be applied in practice and discuss also the dilemmas that may arise within application of the best interests. If there are no questions, then the floor is to Florence.
Thank you very much, Patricia, both for inviting me here and for your kind introduction. Let's see if I can get this screen to show what we wanted to show. Yes, there we go. The best interest of the child is something that is talked about a lot. The question is whether everyone is really clear about what is meant by it, because it is a very, very complex concept. So the use of the term best interests of the child really became part and parcel of child protection and child welfare with the coming of the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1989. And since then, it has been used frequently in other international frameworks and documents that concern child rights and well-being. I did a count for you, and as you can see here, the Convention on the Rights of the Child makes 8 mentions of the best interest of the child. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability has 3. The 2019 Declaration on the Rights of the Child by the UN General Assembly has 27. And the Guidelines on Alternative Care for Children, which was written to make sure that the Convention on the Rights of the Child was implemented in alternative care, has 26 mentions. As mentioned, it mostly started with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and they introduce the principle of best interest in Article 3 by saying, in all actions concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, courts of law, administrative authorities, or legislative bodies, the best interest of the child shall be a primary consideration. Before I forget, we had a poll to start this, so maybe this would be a good point to let you have your say on what your understanding of the best interest of the child is. Linda, could you establish the poll? Thank you. If you could make your vote. This looks very good so far. Anyone else who wants to vote, or shall we go to the results? So the results are that more than half of us is very confident. I'm very glad to hear that, because it's very important in the field that we're working in. So looking on the questions on the best interest of the child, it's great to have this mention and to have this concept introduced, and that it's being mentioned a lot. And we all agree that a child's best interest should be a primary concern. But despite the many mentions that I counted, what keeps being said is that either it should be a primary or paramount concern, or that something is applicable unless it's not in the best interest of the child. No mention is made of how the best interest of the child is defined or how it should be determined. The closest thing I was able to find was in the alternative care guidelines. I apologize for the amount of text on this slide, but since this is the most complete mention of what is involved, even though it's in the limited context of alternative care, it's important to consider the whole point. And though this is about alternative care, it is applicable in other contexts as well. So what it says is that decision-making on alternative care in the best interest of the child should take place through a judicial, administrative, or other adequate and recognized procedure with legal safeguards, including where appropriate, legal representation on behalf of children in any legal proceedings. It should be based on rigorous assessment, planning and review through established structures and mechanisms, and should be carried out on a case-by-case basis by suitably qualified professionals in a multidisciplinary team wherever possible. It should involve full consultation at all stages with the child, according to his or her evolving capacities, and with his or her parents or legal guardians. To this end, all concerned should be provided with the necessary information on which to base their opinion. States should make every effort to provide adequate resources and channels for the training and recognition of the professionals responsible for determining the best form of care, so as to facilitate compliance with these provisions. This is a starting point. At least it gives some information on some of the structures and people that should be involved. But it still doesn't tell us exactly what is involved. The quote on the previous slide included, it should be based on rigorous assessment, planning and review through established structures and mechanisms, and should be carried out on a case-by-case basis. That's great, but what should be involved in this assessment? What do you need to look at and take into consideration if you want to determine what is in the child's best interest? The bad news, and why it's not possible to give an exact definition or step-by-step plan to reliably reach a sound determination of a child's best interest, is that there is no fail-safe form to this. In fact, there is a danger that some people are so desperate for clear guidelines that they may accept it when someone offers them something they claim is such a fail-safe formula. These so-called fail-safe guidelines are usually based on something that worked in one case or a few cases and are then presented as if they are universally applicable. But essentially, anyone who claims that there is a simple fail-safe formula to determine the best interests of the child does not know what they are talking about. It is too complex and too individual to be able to do that. This is also why international legal frameworks prefer not to go anywhere near defining it too much. What is required more than anything to be able to determine the best interest of an individual child fairly reliably is a combination of good training and experience. You need to know what information you need in a particular circumstances, when to dig deeper, and over time you can develop a sense that warns you now and then that a situation is not as it appears, or that while on the surface it seems clear what should be prioritized, in the subjective experience of the child, it would not be in their best interest. So this is a kind of a gut feeling that can really only be developed through experience. So all of this is about training, but it's not just training from books or lectures, because you can't learn this. This has to be learned on the job. So part of the training and the experience needs to be less experienced social workers working together with more experienced ones so that they are able to develop this sense and this experience to be able to make these determinations and develop a gut feeling about it. And that then helps them do better. If they don't have the opportunity to learn on the job under the guidance of more experienced people, they will also learn it on the job, but they will learn it on the job by making serious mistakes, by seeing what goes wrong if you do certain things a certain way. And that is at the expense of the children involved. So unfortunately, I also cannot tell you exactly how to determine the best interest of an individual child. I can only stress some of the necessary ingredients for the determination and to warn you about some of the pitfalls. To start with elements for success, everything starts with a thorough individual assessment. It is never possible to determine the best interest of a particular child without looking closely at that child's situation and background. This individual assessment should be more than just going through a list of questions with the child or with the child and their family. You need to talk to more people in the child's environment. Include their teachers, where relevant it can include medical or paramedical professionals who are part of their care. It can involve the wider extended family or community members or religious community members, people with different perspectives on how the child and the family function and what they need to function well or better. This determination, both the assessment and the decisions made based on it, should never be done by one single individual. It is too much to ask of one person without feedback, without discussion, to really be able to see everything involved in a case. It is through these discussions and different perspectives that you get a full, comprehensive overview of what is needed by a child and what their strengths are, what the family's strengths are that can be built on. Ideally, having more people work on this should involve people with different backgrounds, so a multidisciplinary team. At a minimum, this should involve a counselor and a caseworker. But again, if you have people with different backgrounds and different perspectives, that helps. So if you have someone with medical experience, that can be useful if the child receives medical care. If you have people with an educational background, if you have the local authorities who know about the community and the family, all of these people should be involved, as should the child and the family themselves. When it comes to individual assessment, this can also mean having to have the child actually assessed by medical or paramedical professionals if they are not yet receiving care, or if they don't have a diagnosis, but the situation does look like there might be a diagnosis of some kind. So sometimes going to different professionals to get an official assessment and diagnosis, whether medical or in another field, may also be important to be able to determine the best interest. Then, as said, the child and their family, or a family caring for them, need to be given a voice in the process. They need to be part of it, and they need to not just be able to speak, but also to be given information about what is going on, what is being planned, and what is being considered. They need to validate the findings and conclusions of the team doing the assessment and making the care decisions to make sure that they are actually valid and would be of help. Because to just impose something that I might think would be useful for this family, but there may be things I don't know about, and it might actually not be that useful to them. If you actually have a dialogue about this, they can explain to you why this might not work and why they would think that something else might be more useful. It also gives them agency, gives them a sense of being part of the decision-making, being a partner in the decision-making process. And this can make it more likely that they will cooperate with and abide by the agreements made. If they feel it's just something being imposed on them, then they may not really feel that motivated to work with you and to abide by the agreements. Whereas if they feel it's their agreement, they are much more likely to actually want to take part in it and build on it. Then it's also important to realize that there are always competing priorities. It's almost never possible to simply provide everything that the assessment has shown is needed, because there are just different circumstances that stand in the way of that. An example can be that a child needs education, but this is not available within travelable distance of their family. And the child also needs to grow up in their family. Now, often the solution is that a child is sent to boarding school because education is held in a very high regard and is seen this is a right, whereby the right to grow up in a family is being ignored. And this has been shown in studies to be very damaging to children when they grow up away from their family. So here, decisions need to be made. What are you going to do? We have a problem. School is over there, the family's over here. What do we do now? As much as possible, solutions need to be found to fulfill all the identified needs, or to find a compromise to fulfill part of all the needs, which can include, for example, in the example of education, first of all, to see, can we provide transportation to this family to allow the child to attend a school that's a little bit further away, but with transportation still reachable? Or can we look at establishing a school in or near the community, which would allow not just this child, but also other children in the community to go to this school? Or if it's a child with special needs or disabilities, can we see whether the school in the community could be made inclusive so that support is available for the child's extra needs within the local school, allowing them to attend school within their own community? Or if we're talking about a very remote location, or people who live in a nomadic lifestyle, you could look at mobile education, which has been implemented successfully in many places. So first of all, you look at a compromise or a solution that will fulfill the different identified needs, but it's not always possible. And sometimes it will be necessary to sacrifice one need over another. If that decision has to be made, it needs to be based on an evidence-based approach. It needs to be based on what has been shown to be most likely to have the best outcome for the child and the family. And this can sometimes require some research to find out what tends to be better. And again, you need a dialogue with the child and the family to get their input into it. When weighing the priorities of different important aspects, continuity is a very important one to keep in mind. When you look at the situation of any given child, there are always slight varying circumstances where maybe in this season, the situation at the aunts is really better, while this season, there is a slight advantage to being at the grandparents in this season. So this would suggest that ideally, the child would move around constantly from family to family, except that research has shown that a lack of continuity of care is very damaging. It removes the feeling of safety that is needed to keep stress down and to avoid trauma. Also, it stands in the way of good attachment. So continuity of care within a family should be prioritized over marginal improvements of other situations. So looking at a way to try and keep the child in one family over a long time, preferably permanently, should be given a very high priority. Then finally, in this overview at least, an awareness of trauma and its effects are also essential to be able to effectively determine the best interest of the child. Not taking into account trauma and its effects on behavior, emotions, and reaction leads to decisions that may not actually be in the best interests of the child. And it may make placement in a family unsustainable because the family either ends up feeling that they are failing, that they are unable to care for the child, or feeling that the child is just simply bad, nothing can be done with them. And that leads to placement breakdown. It's important to be aware that all children who have lived in institutions have experienced trauma there. And one of the books that was mentioned just now by Patricia was written by me on the impact that this has on the child and how families can be supported and can support the child to make placements of a child from an institution in a family sustainable. Now, I think we can have a small break to do the second poll after we've talked about some of the elements that are needed. So here the question is, what does your organization need to be better able to determine and act according to the best interest of the individual child? Do you need more training, more resources, more awareness raising among the stakeholders we work with, or all of the above? Yes. Okay, so it looks like a lot of support is still needed, with most people saying all of the above. And then we will go to the obstacles and the pitfalls. So these are things that I often see go wrong in places where the best interest of the individual child should be at the center of everything, but might not be, or even sometimes in places where attempts are being made to make sure that it is at the center, but where capacity is lacking. To start with, if there is insufficient staff and they have not received the training they need to fairly confidently make determinations of best interest, the decisions made are not going to be based on thorough and informed enough assessments to be able to be reliably sound. The reason why there's a stress on insufficient staff is that a proper individual assessment is very time consuming. It cannot be taken, it's not a conversation with a child of an hour. It is often requires building a relationship with both the child and the family, a relationship of trust to allow them to really open up to you and give you the information that you need. And the information that you need is much broader than just a tick list of a few questions. And that requires an appropriate number of staff to be able to invest that kind of time into proper assessments. And then, of course, we've talked about the need for education, need for training and experience to be able to know how to do an assessment. Then the second part is that to be something to be aware of is that sometimes child participation is weaponized, you might say. And this is done to try and shut up annoying people like me who just make things too complicated because I'm just too demanding, according to the people I work with. An example of this was a teenage girl who was HIV positive that I worked with. She was in an institution where I worked with the management, and she was weeks away from her final high school exams. Unfortunately, recently her health had started to deteriorate quite rapidly, which indicated that the medication she was on for her HIV was no longer effective. She was probably resistant. So I urged them to take her to hospital to get tests done to find out if she was resistant, and if so, what medication she should be changed to as soon as possible. Unfortunately, getting these tests done required going to the nearest larger city, which between travel and the time it takes to have the tests done and the waiting at the hospital would be at least a day's work. Being at the end of the school year, obviously everyone was busy, so management was not that interested in doing something like that. And they said to me they would just let the girl focus on her exams, do her study, do her exams, and then after that they would take her. The problem is that when HIV is not being controlled by the medication anymore, it can get out of control pretty quickly. And her health was already deteriorating fast. So the weeks it would take until after her exam were a very, very severe risk. So I insisted. Management got exasperated, and in the end, they tried to defeat me with my own weapon. I had, after all these years, been telling them that they should listen to children. So they came to me and they said they had talked to the girl. The girl had said she wanted to wait until after her exam. So there. I understand completely that that was what the girl said, because as long as she had been in the institution, she had been told that there was nothing as important in her life as her final high school exams. She was also not fully aware of just how serious her health condition was and what the risks of waiting were. At her age, she would also have trouble really understanding that a high school diploma is not going to do you much good if you're only going to live for a few more months after you get one. So I understand the decision of the girl, but it was not an informed decision. And while I do stress that we need to talk to and listen to children, that doesn't mean we need to put the responsibility of the final decision on them, or that we should just do what they say, even if we know they are making an uninformed decision. I kept up the fight, and in the end, I won it. The girl was taken to hospital before her exams. She was put on other medication and her health improved. She also passed her exams. So thankfully, it had a good outcome, but it's really important to understand that sometimes these things that are held up as good practice can be weaponized and used against you. The same can happen with the best interest principle, the best interest of the child. For that, I have two examples. One is that in Belgian law, children with disabilities cannot be placed in foster care. They have to be institutionalized in specialized institutions, because that is in their best interest, is what the law says. The law actually states that if a child were placed in foster care, there they would not get the specialized care they need, and therefore it would amount to child abuse, and it would not be in their best interest. So they have to be placed in institutions for their best interest. This is flawed logic. It presumes that there are only two options to choose between, which is not true. Obviously, we don't want a child with significant special needs placed in a family who have no idea how to deal with that. That would not be in their best interest. But it is possible to train and support a foster family to care very well for children with disabilities. And it doesn't mean that the only alternative is to be institutionalized, except that when it says so in the law, you don't have that option anymore. So this is kind of a twisted logic that is used to advance an agenda or to support a prejudice, claiming that if we do not do what they say, we do not serve children's best interests. Another example is a discussion with a government representative who claimed that children of nomadic tribes had to go to boarding school because we have to consider their best interests, and their parents were just dragging them from place to place. This is not a best interest determination. This is the prejudice of the settled community opposite the nomadic community. Again, this is not the only way. It is in the best interest of these children to grow up with their own parents in their own community, learning their own culture, learning how to live as part of the nomadic tribes. And if they want later in life, deciding whether or not they want to be a part of that. But if you take them away from their family for years to put them in a boarding school, where they don't learn anything about their own culture, they become strangers to their family. And if after their high school diploma, they are sent back to their family, they are not able to settle into the nomadic lifestyle anymore because they're unfamiliar with it. This is not in the best interest. This is advancing prejudice and supporting it by using that argument. Finally, I've worked with various social workers in different countries, providing training through discussion of cases they handled, where they did everything they knew how to do to determine a child's best interest. But due to lack of training or experience, they were simply unable to recognize some of the needs, risks, or dangers. They're sometimes quite blown away when I accurately predict what will go badly wrong, because to me, the danger signs are obvious and the outcome is very predictable. But if you have not learned to recognize this, you have no way of seeing it or taking it into account in a best interest determination. So I hope that this has given you some useful insights into what goes into determining the best interest of the child. And I hope you're not too disappointed that I'm unable to give you a simple step-by-step guide on how to get it right. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. And as Patricia said, afterwards, we will break up in smaller groups to discuss some of the dilemmas that we face in determining the best interest of the child. Thank you very much for your time and interest. And I pass the floor back to Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence, for this very clear presentation. And I hope it's very helpful for everybody to have a more picture how the work can be done very individually, seeing the situation of the children, but also to look with different views and different expertise to a situation, and that we can maybe bring in practice also in the breakout rooms. I've seen one question already in the chat. Oh, it's not there anymore. There was one question of Miriam I've seen, or is it already solved?
I see it there in the chat.
Oh, it's there.
But it was temporary, or it was solved by Florence when she explained more about how to deal with this problem. But I'm still interested, Florence, can you explain, because you said boarding is very damaging to children. is that, have you any more information about it, or is there something how is that proven?
Essentially, boarding school is a form of institutionalization, and it depends very much. I mean, there are different types of boarding school where the children board 5 days a week, then go back to their families on the weekends. That's far less damaging. But in practice, there are a lot of boarding schools that are de facto institutions where a child enters age 6, 8, 12 and comes out at 18, having not seen their family in the meantime. That is simply an institution. That's institutionalization. And in a way, it's a worse case of institutionalization, because what I've seen when I compare boarding schools that I've visited and institutions that I've visited, institutions are acknowledged to provide care for children. So they have caregivers most of the time, at least, not always, unfortunately, but most of the time there are caregivers who are there to provide care to children. Boarding schools have a different system. They are a school. Children have teachers, and then there is a supervisor of a dorm. But that supervisor is there to keep them in line. Supervisor is not there to provide any sort of care. And even in boarding schools with children with special needs, I've seen very good adaptations in the classrooms, but then they're sent back to their dorm. And that's pretty much it. Then they can wait until they're back in class next day. And as I said, when you get to, when you remove children from their family and from the community for years on end, they just don't know their own culture anymore. They don't know their own family anymore. And they have a lot of trouble reintegrating.
Yeah, thank you for explaining.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. My chat is back in my screen. I was lost somewhere. I see a new reaction from Jacqueline. A school can be constructed at the reach of the child, or the family can reallocate near the school if they live in a rented house. Yes, indeed. That's a good addition.
Absolutely. And also what I mentioned, providing transportation, I've also seen that make a huge difference, where a child would pretty much have to walk a day to get to a school. So you can't do that every day. But when the school or the town council provided buses, which, okay, the child still had to be on the bus for an hour in the morning and in the evening, but it was possible to go to school. And suddenly a lot more children went to school and stayed in school without leaving their family.
Thank you. Any more questions? You can raise your hand via the reactions, or you can just put on your microphone. I hope I see everybody in my screen now. Any more questions? Otherwise, I have one for you, Florence, because you told about child participation and having the opinion of the child. And the discussion I hear a lot is, when do you know that a child is also telling what he or she wants, and it's not an answer because the child thinks you want to hear that answer? It's very difficult. So people say, oh, but the child told me this or that. Can you give some advice in doing, when you have the gut feeling this is not really the opinion of the child?
That's very difficult, and it has to do with something I mentioned, which is that you need to develop a relationship of trust with the child. And that is something which is often overlooked, how important that is, having a relationship of trust with the child and the family. Because in my work, I mostly work with children who are going to be moved from an institution to a family. So you work with the child themselves, and then you find out if the family is okay, and you bring that together. But a lot of people also work in the community to support the family in the community. So you have the family unit to start with. And yes, when you come from outside, there is a lot of, saying the right thing to try and get what you think is needed. or, those kind of things. And building a relationship of trust comes from not starting by saying, okay, I would like this information from you, please. It comes from saying, okay, I'm here, I would like to help. I understand that you don't believe that, because many, many people have said that before me. They've all disappeared. So I want to show you first. I'm going to keep coming back. I'm going to ask you how I can help. I'm going to do my best to actually do that. And only after you've established a point where you do have some trust and some confidence, do you start to say, okay, it seems to me that it would be useful to work towards this. What do you think? And can we work towards that together? And also to explain, I understand that it's not necessarily socially or culturally acceptable to, talk about the fact that you get beaten up every day. But if you don't tell me that things are happening, then I have no way of helping you. And I would really like to find a way of doing that. But this is a long process. I'm not talking about 2 afternoons over 2 weeks. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks, especially with people who are traumatized or who have had trust broken again and again and again. You also need to look at, am I the right person to go in there to ask this question? When I did some consultancies in Kenya last year, I went to visit some of the families who had children with disabilities, either ones who were in institutions or ones who had been reintegrated, to find out how it was going and what they needed, because they lacked the support they needed. And I was giving policy advice on how to make sure that would be there. I was very unhappy that I had to go into those villages, because just being there as a white person causes an enormous stir and actually can cause a lot of trouble for those families. Unfortunately, there was nothing I could do about the fact that that is who I am. And it was also important that that information, was found and that the right questions were asked. So I did go, but I made sure that the group that went was smaller than they intended to, and that, we try to mitigate a lot of these things. The same can be, if you have a family that you want to help with a single mother, if a male caseworker goes in there, that might actually end the conversation right there. So you need to look at the situation and decide among colleagues who is most likely to get somewhere here, which might be in a family where there's a disability. Do we have a staff member with a disability? That already increases trust enormously, because this is someone who understands, who doesn't carry the stigma, or someone with a similar tribal or religious background, trying to find ways of having a higher chance of trust and being tolerant of the fact that it takes a lot of time to earn trust. And that goes both with families and with children. And when you work with children in institutions, they, throughout years, have learned from experience that it's a really, really bad idea to trust anyone. And if there was any counseling at all, which usually there isn't, counselors will have been there for a year, maybe 2, and then they disappeared again because they got a better job offer and it was someone else and they had to start over again. And all these people came in promising they would be there for them. They would stick with them, and they didn't. And you're the next one. So you need to realize that you have a serious uphill battle in earning that trust. And you need to also realize that that is entirely appropriate from the child's point of view. They're not being difficult. They are trying to survive. So it's not a question of, I can't answer how do you solve it, but these are all things to take into account.
Thank you very much.
Can I make an addition? That we also should not forget that the child often is has troubles choosing between the loyalty to the parents or the family and the institution owners, because they have taken care of them. And even that is for the child sometimes very difficult to say to a worker from an institution that they really would love to go home, because they also want to be loyal to them.
Thank you. Yes. Any other questions for Florence? Then we will take the step to the breakout rooms. You will be invited to join one of the 4 breakout rooms. Every breakout room has a chair. So Marijke, Monique, Shanta, me will lead one of the breakout rooms. Linda will stay in the plenary room to help you in case you have problems in entering your breakout room. We will ask in each breakout room to have one person responsible for writing down some notes and giving feedback or giving a summary of what you discussed. When we are back in the plenary room, we will stay there up to, let's say, 3:20, and then we come back, so we have 10 minutes to exchange and to closure the program. Do I forget something? No, I think we can start entering the breakout rooms. See you later.
Patricia, jij bent muted, hè? Hoor ik het alleen niet. Oh.
Ja,
Oh,
But I'm
oh,
still
sorry.
waiting for Jacqueline. Where's, oh, there she is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I was talking and it went out on my phone, the sound. Is everybody already back, Linda, or not? Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
everyone's back.
Ah, great. Thank you very much. We have only 9 minutes left. So somebody from group 1, who's willing to tell only short in 1 minute what your main discussion was?
I think we have to wait, and Anita is, yeah, she's going to explain. I think, yeah,
Yes, we
she's
started-
not still. She is still. Yeah, she's. Yeah.
Ah, yeah.
I'm
yeah.
here. Yes, we started and ended by saying that our discussion was not at all considering the child's being left from the family. So that point was not touched at all because it was our starting point to discuss the way nomads are traveling, the way the tribe is traveling or having fixed places in the community. There we brainstormed about solutions to bring in education there. Renai from Indonesia had a nice example of bringing an educator to the place where a certain tribe is settled for a while and bring in education, not only for the disabled child, but for all the children, which is to us a nice solution to maybe not formal, but to bring in education for a certain tribe who's traveling and sometimes staying for a while somewhere. I had an example in Tanzania from a Maasai group who have a fixed point in the community where resources are brought from the church and from the government to start up education there. There's no education at all for the kids. We were wondering, yes, if nomads have a certain season of going and coming back, that you can try to bring in educational solutions tailor-made to that tribe. It's very difficult to discuss that because you don't know the ingredients, you don't know the possibilities. But that can be something to take a look at. We had also the idea of one of the mamas or the parents to be trained and teach the children, as well as siblings might take in a place there to train the children, like homeschooling programs are offering. We don't know about mobile education a lot, but Rob was mentioning that UNICEF had those kind of mobile classes. And finally, we started to talk about medical connections for disabled children, but then the time was finished.
Thank you very much, Annette, for this discussion. We had
You're not
Distorted right now.
very robotic, Patricia. I'm not sure if it's me or all of us.
That is not, maybe we take it over. I think
Network. Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
hear you now.
Yes, sure.
I don't know what happened, but I think Phyllis has no sound now. So Miriam, can you give a summary? Oh, there's Phyllis.
Hi, everyone. So from room 2, we've been able to discuss the case and we came up with suggestions. And our first attempt would be to assess the child. You can be able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. All right. So our first attempt will be to first of all,
Phyllis.
the child, and then link up with the
Now, your question.
the case was of a child with disability. And we are to make a decision whether this child is to go to a boarding school. And so we decided that our first step will be first of all.
Phyllis, Phyllis.
Yes.
Patricia, it seems that you are having problems with sounds. I can actually hear Phyllis very well.
Exactly. Continue, Phyllis, sorry.
Can hear you fine.
All right. Yeah, so our first approach to the case would be to first of all conduct an assessment and then link up with like a National Council for Persons with Disability for them to be able to help us that the child will be assessed to understand the type of disability one, and also get recommendations from them on how the child can be supported further, and also just to identify if there are any medical concerns that need to be addressed before any other thing. We acknowledge that education is really, really important. However, if the safety of the child is not, first of all, addressed, then this child will not be able to get the quality education that they need to get. And so this assessment will help us, one, to identify if there are any medical concerns, and also what kind of education support they need. Then the second approach will be to also identify what support services are within the communities, and if there are schools that can be able to provide this education for the child as they go back home to their family, then this would be the best option for the child so that they can be able to build up that family relationship with their family and even their other siblings back at home. And as we discussed this, we also noted that it is important to be flexible enough as you're working with the family and developing the care plans for the individual child, so that you're able to identify enough services. And if one intervention probably is not working for the best interest of this particular child, then you're able to switch and identify another intervention or another service that can be able to fully support the particular child. And we also talked about the need for us to ensure that the child gets psychosocial support, and also acknowledging that there's need to have long-term plans for independent and sustainability for this particular child. So as we are planning for the education, we are also looking into the future. Is it allowing the child to go through the normal system of education, or could we also consider maybe some skills development for the particular child for them to be able to acquire something that they can use even in the future and gain some income, some decent income, so that they can be able to stand on their own and be independent. So that is the summary of what we discussed in room 2. Unless I've left something, maybe Patricia and Miriam, you can add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Phyllis. Maybe the person from group 3, Marijke.
Yes, that's us. It was Marijke, it was Jacqueline, and Monica joined, and the fourth person left already, I think. We had a case that there was a twins with some delay in developing, and they were brought to our facilities, to our institution, which we thought it was not a governmental institution, but a private initiative, maybe from an NGO. And so when those children came back twice a year or something, they back to the family. The facility, the institution noticed that that they had a lack of good food and they have health problems. So what to do? Should we take them back to the family, or should we keep them in the facility? And we thought in solutions. So we thought best place is in the family, even for these two twins. And maybe we could spend the budget for the family instead for the institution. In which way we can support the family for training needed to develop the twins, and maybe to train someone with a hospital training and things like that. Maybe to give them some support by home gardening or something like that. So we would like to empower the family to be able to support the children at home and to strengthen the family in that way. And then we discussed about the stakeholders. And Jacqueline was from Africa, I'm from Sri Lanka. So there was also some change of interchanging of the facilities given in Africa and in Sri Lanka, but mostly we could say we can get involved the local people of the vicinity of that household, so the police, the family, neighbors, maybe some chiefs, and in that way they can uplift the situation in the family. Give some support. And then we had to weigh what is the best option for the twins. And then we had a discussion, Marijke and I from the Netherlands, and Jacqueline and Monica are from the local community. So we discussed about the position of a Westerner. In what position do you step back? What stage? In what stage you still interfere? What is the position of the case manager? And how do you start conferencing the case with stakeholders? And in what situation a child can make its own decisions and bring in their opportunities, their wish, and in when does a case manager take a decision? So, but then it was ended. So time was up. So yeah, it was interesting, specifically to discuss this topic with two cultures and to learn from the local partner.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm all the time muted. I don't know what happens. I'm really sorry for the technique. I don't know what's happening. We are really running out of time. Is group 4 having any additions on the discussion of Kirsten, because they had the same case of those twins?
Yes, group 4. Group 4, we had the same case. What we discussed, of course, was about the stakeholders that could involve so that the lives of those twins could change. We have seen that it could be an involvement of different government agencies concerned in health and nutrition specifically. We have also sort of another stakeholder as development partners and other NGOs. Churches can also contribute to the improvement of the life of those twins, and mosques. We have also saw that family involvement is also needed. The family is the key stakeholder, extended family. And like in Rwanda, also we have community volunteers who are all the time in charge of children with acute malnutrition. So community volunteers also are stakeholders that could be involved to support the improvement of the lives of those twins. I think that is what we have discussed about stakeholders, but I'd like to call Monique to add on a slight comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Monique,
Muted.
do you want to add something? No. Yours. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Ellie. What we found very remarkable in the case was that it says that the twins needed structural food and of good quality, and sometimes needed to be checked in the hospital at a specialized pediatrician because of acute problems while they were staying in the institutions. So we already had the discussion, okay, why do they need this medical support while they're in the institution? That could be because of trauma or institutionalization, or maybe that food even in the institution was not sufficient for them. And the other thing that we want to add is that it's already said, but it's cheaper to support children in families than in institutions. And the cases didn't give enough inside information, like the hospital wasn't nearby. Yeah, what is nearby? And is there any way that we could solve that distance? Or so the case didn't give enough information.
Yes, that's true.
That's always the difficulty when you have a case and you have to discuss it in 20 minutes and you don't know any background information. So it's a bit guessing, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Since we are running out of time, I would like to close this. If there's anybody who wants to share something, please email me, or I can bring you in contact with each other. We will send you the recording and also the PowerPoint presentation of Florence. We will also send you a document of SOS Children's Villages around this topic, which maybe gives you some more guidelines. We will share it also with you. And if you have any questions about it, you can always go to Marijke or email me, and I will bring you in contact with Marijke about the use of this. But we will write a little introduction about this document, how you can use it. I want to thank you very much for your presence today in this webinar. I hope it was useful. Florence, thank you very much for sharing your experience, for your clear presentation. It was really helpful. Always time is too short, even if you have more than 1.5 hours. So if there's any need for a follow-up discussion or dialogue, let me know, and we will organize that for you. Thank you very much also for the other people who prepared this and for your participation from all around the world. And I wish you a good weekend.
Can I ask something? If you can make a group picture, if anybody who does not want to be on the picture, then mute your video, or else put it on, put your nice face on, and then
Celine,
everybody
you're
ready?
great.
Oh, then there will look more people. Okay, everybody ready? Smile.
Yes,
thank you.
Photos there. We will send it to you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
nice
much,
weekend.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice
Thank you.
weekend.
Bye-bye.
Nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Net iemand binnengelaten die nu pas binnenkomt, blijkbaar.
Oh, ja.
Die naam hadden we niet gezien, nee. Kunnen we die nog? Ja,
Hij is weg.
Hij is weer weg. Nou, de techniek